welcome to episode 8 of Stories from a Bar. I'm your host, Chris Osborne, and joining me for this episode is the Heritage and Education Coordinator from Discover Albany, Maeve McEneny?
McEneny.
McEneny?
And actually, I was married in June, so McEneny Johnson.
McEneny Johnson.
Yeah.
I forgot to ask you how to pronounce that part before I started.
That's close enough.
So how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic now that I've had a beer and now that I have a second. And we're sitting here.
Absolutely. Happy hour is the best.
It really is. First off, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, this is my favorite season.
Secondly, what are you drinking?
I am drinking, as I said, my favorite season, so I figured a Sam Adams Oktoberfest was completely appropriate.
I did not even see that they had that on top.
Oh, I couldn't find it either. I had to ask specifically, what's your Oktoberfest? And they went, Sam Adams. Easy enough.
I went with the Lagunitas IPA.
Perfect.
I enjoy Lagunitas. They've got some good stuff.
I do. I'm almost IPA fatigued. I'm almost getting to that point, but I will say, once I'm a total beer drinker when it comes to Oktoberfests. If a beer, the redder a beer is, the happier I am.
If only that was like hair.
If only it was like hair, yes.
So for this episode, we are hanging out here in the Albany room at Pearl Street Pub. Hopefully there's not too much of an echo, as it's a large empty room that we're both sitting in. Right here in downtown Albany.
Yeah, they even furnished it. We've got this tin ceiling, and they've put these fake flickering candles around us.
It actually looks good.
It's pretty eerie.
Yes. I haven't been here in quite a while. I forgot how large this place actually was.
Yeah, there's even an upstairs. There's like a club area there,
Oh,
the upper
yeah.
room. Oh, yeah.
It's been years, but I used to come to shows here and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. They had an improv festival here about a year or two ago.
Oh.
I saw my sister perform, of all things. She does a little improv. So, yeah, it was pretty fun.
Awesome.
It's a great space.
So a big shout out to Pearl Street Pub for letting us record here. Be sure to stop in, grab a drink. They have a nice pool table set up, get some great food, and definitely check out some live tunes. This place definitely has a good live music atmosphere, whether it's up in the main bar or downstairs. Yeah.
Where do we want to start?
Well, why don't we start with Discover Albany?
Yeah.
I mentioned you were the Heritage and Education Coordinator, right? For
Yes.
Discover Albany?
That means I wear a lot of hats.
Yes.
If you don't know where we are down at Quackenbush Square. That's next door to the Old English Pub, which I think we'll be talking about a little later.
We will.
Oh, yeah. And then there's a great little museum there. There's also a planetarium. And I'll sometimes, as you hear the education portion, we'll welcome school groups and senior groups and all kinds of folks, to the visitor center. But it's open 7 days a week for anyone interested in learning about the history of Albany or even what to do. And then I switch hats, and the Heritage Coordinator, I am the lead coordinator for the Cultural Heritage and Tourism Program, CHAT, for the City of Albany. And really what that means is I pull together heritage sites like Schuyler Mansion and Cherry Hill and Tenbrook. Most of those we'll talk about again on this. Mm-hmm. And we come up with things to do. Programming that we're all doing that's similar. So if you go to www.albany.org, you can check out our site. You talked to Craig
Yes.
last time?
Yep.
Last podcast.
Good old Craig Gravina.
Craig Gravina, our Albany Ale historian.
Yes.
And
Mr. Mustache.
Mr. Mustache himself, also sometimes with cool hats. But he wanted to participate in some beverage history, and his program tied in with other programs that sites were doing. So food history became a thing, taste and traditions. But of course, that also means keeping in mind that Albany is one of the oldest cities in the country, right?
It is.
Yeah, we've got over a 400-year history. Means that Haunted Albany is a pretty appropriate theme. So if you go on albany.org, not only will we talk about my tours today, but you can check out what other sites are doing as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, that was a mouthful.
No, it's great because, and when I was talking to Craig for the last episode, I found him through the Discover Albany. I don't know if Times Union reposted the Twitter account, or it was an ad for the historic brew tours.
Exactly.
That you guys organized and he leads.
Yeah, so, and I try to do some original programming like that and tours. And then Craig's a great partner because he's also really good about telling people, if you're interested in what I'm talking about here, go to this site, you know.
He was fantastic and quite the history and beer nerd.
Gosh. Yes, you get him going. You don't even have to give him a pint, but if you give him a pint, well, you'll learn the
He
whole
was a
thing.
happy guy.
He's a very happy guy.
He was answering questions before I even asked him, and I just sat there and let him go.
Well, and that's a lot how those tours came about. Is he came to me, he knew that I was working with all these sites, and I pretty much just let him go, and he talked. He actually showed up with maps. We were at the Allen Street pub. He showed up with Google Maps. He was showing me where all these sites were. And then I showed him that we could do that on a smartphone just as easily. I love you, Craig. Sorry. But we had a great time. But it was just listening to him talk with a pint in his hand, and it was terribly engaging. So I said...
He really does know how to convey the stories and the stuff. And for anyone who doesn't know, he was leading these historic brew tours. I mentioned it in the last podcast that he was on. I believe it's done for this season now, though. Right?
Yes, but I suspect we'll be doing them again next year.
That is good to know. It was fantastic. I know they break up into certain parts of downtown Albany, right?
Yeah.
And we did this one immediately downtown, pretty much up and down Pearl Street.
Yeah.
And I was blown away, actually, by some of the history.
It's really incredible that so much of our history is rooted in breweries and alcohol and the sale of alcohol. And he talks about how we were some of the first people figuring out alcohol sales, right? There's that absurd story of Peter Bronct, I think it was, talking about how he had a brewery and his wife was selling his beer in the tavern, which we know that's like going to the pump station, that's going to Druthers, but it was completely illegal.
Oh, yeah.
And I said to Craig, that makes absolutely no sense. And he says, well, we hadn't figured it out yet. So it was really even eye-opening for me how that culture, and I think what makes us unusual is that it wasn't so much people, you know, drinking at home. He talks about home brew, people brewing at home, but that these early Dutch had the sense to make it economic, you know, that we could sell it. So that's pretty special.
It is. It was. I definitely recommend the tour whenever it gets up and going again, either in the spring or next summer.
Yeah, usually in the spring.
Okay. And that's actually how I ended up meeting you,
Yes.
who, of course, works for Discover Albany, and point of interest for me, also handles the ghost tours.
And so that's my other hat, other hat.
We are actually recording this on October 1st. Mm-hmm. So I've been waiting. I think I started this podcast back in April, I believe. And one of the first ideas I had for an episode was I knew I wanted to do something about hauntings and ghost stories.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do with the podcast. I just knew once October rolled around, I wanted to do an episode like that. And 6 months later, here we are.
And here we are. And I'll tell you how we met, too, is we finished the tour and we went to Albany Pump Station and we had some Albany Ale, and you heard that I did these ghost tours. You can usually find me under the original Albany Ghost Tour Facebook. And somehow that came up and you asked me, oh, well, tell me a ghost story.
Yes.
And I did it, and then you said, do you want to be on the podcast? And I went, oh, he just auditioned me. I didn't even know.
Neither did I.
Neither did you. So I guess if I was really terrible at it, you would have been like, that's nice.
No, I probably still would have asked.
And you probably, all right.
Yes.
That's fair.
So how long have you been working with Discover Albany?
Discover Albany for 3 years.
Okay.
And telling ghost stories officially for just about over 10 years.
Oh, wow.
It was the original Albany Ghost Tour, but I told my first ghost story when I was 6 years old. So it's just something that I've always been doing.
And you've loved it ever since?
And I've loved it ever since. And we call ourselves the original Albany Ghost Tour because it was the first ghost tour about historic Albany that we found anyone was doing. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Awesome. And I'm going to do my best to certainly get this podcast up and out to the people as fast as I can,
Sure.
so they can be aware of all the ghost tours. But when do the ghost tours run?
So there's a few different ghost tours you can do. The one in Albany is the historic Albany pub crawl. And
Yes.
we do that with Historic Albany Foundation, and we do it with the Tenbrook Mansion,
Okay.
the very haunted Tenbrook Mansion.
Oh,
I
and
should
we will
say.
certainly talk about that in a little bit.
Absolutely, and it's very, very cool. So those will start on the 11th. October 11th.
Okay.
And then they will continue Tuesday, Thursdays through October. And I highly recommend you go onto Eventbrite. If you go to Pembroke Mansion's website, you find that Eventbrite because it does sell out.
Yes, and actually that's where I got the ticket for the Brew Tour, Eventbrite.
Yes, it's one of the best sites, I think, for anybody who's interested in doing tours or events. Eventbrite's a really handy tool.
Awesome. So when I was looking for a place to record this, I had a couple ideas that didn't pan out, and we are, thankfully, Pearl Street Pub let us record here. When I told you we were going to Pearl Street Pub, you mentioned a person, I believe your immediate response was almost, oh, great, DeWitt Clinton had died there. I did not know who that was, and of course that's great for the podcast since this is where we are recording. Not so great for Mr. Clinton.
No.
So let's talk about some ghost stuff.
Absolutely.
And Albany deaths.
It is, and if you're walking on Pearl Street, you can actually see a plaque. There is a little plaque in front of the Pearl Street Pub that says, DeWitt Clinton, the governor. This was, as I understand it, a site for the governor's mansion, and this is where he was in Albany.
I looked him up briefly after you sent me that name, and it turns out, he was an American politician, served as U.S. Senator, Mayor of New York City, and the 6th governor of New York, dying suddenly February 11th, 1828.
1828.
Here in Albany,
Yeah, he had what was called the dropsy of the chest, which I had to look up myself.
I read congestive heart failure.
Well, and that's what it's actually called.
Okay.
But back then,
the dropsy
of the chest. But that's, an inflammation. But he said that when his doctor told him this could kill you, he said, that's all right. I don't care. I'm prepared.
He's just ready to live out the rest of his life.
Which sounds really romantic, except for the fact that when he died, he left his family destitute. I
did read that too. Yes.
Yeah, your listeners would be familiar because in I think your 4th or 5th grade curriculum, you heard about Clinton's Ditch. You heard about the
There's
song.
a bar in Schenectady called Clinton's Ditch.
Absolutely,
yes.
Yeah, and that's where it comes from, DeWitt Clinton.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yes, yeah, and you'll find anytime you see a street named Clinton, we have Clinton Ave here.
Yep.
You have Clinton Square where McGeary's is. And that's DeWitt Clinton.
Okay.
That's where that name is coming from. So he was famous because Clinton's Ditch, he had this idea for the Erie Canal, right? He wanted to dig this crazy canal, I guess. I don't know if there's a more artful way to say it. And they thought he was crazy. It was so expensive. And he said, no, this is going to change transportation. This is going to, our economy, it's going to boom. This is what we need. And it turned out he was absolutely right. And if you go back to Craig's podcast talking about the Erie Canal and what that even did for our brewery industry, it was revolutionary. Nothing like it had been done. And it was incredible from Albany to Buffalo. So he's really an innovative, brilliant man. And he did die in this building. And he leaves his family destitute, right? So even though he had this foresight, his own personal finances, he didn't seem to care much.
And it was funny, we were setting up and talking to Alice, the GM here at Pearl Street Pub, who was helping us get set up, mentioning it just recently started where the elevator door in this room randomly opening with no one in the elevator or by it.
So
She said she hasn't had any experiences, but...
No, and I find people who work in buildings consistently, they tend to say that if there is an entity here, they leave them alone. That's Pembroke Mansion, that's any of the ones they say, well... I
feel like that's almost Ghost 101.
It's Ghost, yeah.
Don't break out the Ouija board and try to screw with the ghosts.
No. But how the tours, so I've been doing this pub crawl now. This is my 3rd year with Historic Albany Foundation in Pembroke, but I've been doing it for 4 years. But how that tour started, we called it Hops and Haunts. We were with another tour company.
Hops and Haunts, I like that.
Hops and Haunts, and it was with my partner in the original Albany Ghost Tour, Paul Nooney.
Okay.
And we started doing these tours with the old Albany Aqueducts, and we had a trolley tour. And so that was the first iteration of this tour. And we'd show up at bars after the tours, because that's what you do after a tour.
It's what you do after just about anything.
Just about anything, to celebrate, to toast. But we were younger and sprier, and we'd be in makeup and costumes. So we'd show up at these pubs, and people would say to us, like, what are you doing? And we said, we just gave a ghost tour. And you wouldn't believe the people who say, oh, well, did you know this place is haunted? Or let me tell you what happened to me. So that's how Hops and Haunts started, because it spawned all these other stories. We had enough that we had an offshoot. So I loved...
I feel like if you look around enough, you can certainly find something paranormal-y.
Well, and that's what was fun about talking to Alice is, she's walking through, she's setting this up, and I said, is it haunted? She didn't say no. She kept talking in the plural of like, well, they leave me alone, which who's they? And then she demurred and told us that the elevator has...
Mr. Clinton.
And I said, well, there's Mr. Clinton.
Exactly.
Playing with the elevator.
It's got to be. There's no other explanation whatsoever.
At least in October. That's my rule. People always say, do you believe in ghosts?
It's the 1 month a year where there is no other explanation.
No.
Nope, it's a ghost.
Well,
November 1st rolls around, it's an electrical problem.
It's an electrical problem. And I find most people on the tours are like that. For however long I have you, that hour to hour and a half, it's all real because it's fun and it's October.
It is fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some of the other places around Albany here. I know if you do just a quick Google search, like I procrastinated and did last night, the Capitol building is definitely the main one that seems to come up a lot.
Yes, and the author of that tour, and they do tours through October. They are free, but you absolutely need to make a reservation at empirestateplaza.org.
Right.
But that tour is written by Stuart Lehman, and it's my absolute favorite ghost tour. And I was lucky enough when I was a Capitol tour guide, I used to do that one.
Oh, really?
Yes. So if you Google, you'll see me in the Cape giving that tour. And my favorite story from there, most people know about the night watchman, Sam Abbott.
Yeah, that was the first one that comes up, seems to be the most famous ghost story in relation.
And he died in the fire of 1911. So most of the spooky things that happened there, they associate with him. The only thing I can tell you that happened to me was on a ghost tour, of course. I was in the hallway where he passed away, where they found his body. And as I was telling the story, there was a door that held a fire hose, and in the middle of the story it busted open.
Really?
And so that's the only thing I could say for Sam, but I have another story that I love, and you'll see why it's my favorite.
Fantastic.
And
that's why we're here.
Yes. So when you go into the Assembly Chamber, the New York State Assembly Chamber has a ceiling that is the third ceiling.
Yes.
The original ceiling was vaulted.
Is this about an artist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, William Morris Hunt.
I don't want to jump ahead in the story.
No, it's not fine.
Okay.
So it had these vaulted ceilings that were the tallest attempted vaulted ceiling in the world.
Really?
Attempted, right? Underline that word. But they also had these beautiful murals. And the murals were painted by a man named William Morris Hunt. And he slaved over these murals. He'd go in, he worked late at night, and there's theories that being there late at night actually ravaged his health, but he didn't care. Like he painted them right on the stone.
Dedicated to his art.
Dedicated to his
Literally.
art. Well, as you will see, so he was so proud, and when they revealed the new assembly chamber, they raved about the art. It was absolutely beautiful, and he was all excited to be the Capitol artist, but the Capitol building is the most expensive Capitol building in the country to this day.
Really?
Yes. So Governor Black is looking at this, and he says, this is ridiculous. We cannot afford this. No more art. So here, William Morris Hunt has...
Now, how long ago do you...
I would have to double-check the year on that again.
A homework assignment for listeners.
Yes. So I would say that the Governor Black, 1899 is when it was completed. The second ceiling is... the third ceiling would be after 1911, so sometime before there. So Governor Black, he fires William Morris Hunt, and he's completely, this is devastating. and he goes to his friends to sort of recoup his health, but he always fought with depression. So we don't know whether it's the depression, we don't know if it's the failing health, but one day he went for a walk before breakfast. He didn't come back, and they found him washed up. There was like a little riverbed or lake, and
Oh, wow.
he was washed up on shore, and his umbrella that he used as a cane snapped in half. So we don't know, was it suicide or did he fall? We don't know. Now, the ghost story. They did have ghost hunters a number of years ago in the Capitol. They didn't know much of the history, just enough, and they probably were looking for Sam Abbott. Now, they're in the Assembly Chamber, which does not have a vaulted ceiling because it started to quickly, as the buildings settle, crack, and it was not stable, and even the murals are washing away because they painted it right on the wall. So they had to drop the ceiling, covering the murals, so you can't see them today. So that's another thing. William Morris Hunt, his murals are lost. They're lost to history.
Which is one of the reasons people think he committed suicide, right?
Perhaps. He died before the murals were covered.
Oh, okay.
So that is one thing. He died before the murals were covered. However, it is sort of interesting. That's when they begin to fade and crack. So these ghost hunters come in and they use EVP, electronic voice phenomenon.
Yep.
So it's like static, and you pick up the voices. And they caught a voice that said, "William Morris is behind the door."
Really?
And it was a tour guide who raised her hand and said, well, the artist is William Morris Hunt. But here's my theory. Was it William Morris Hunt saying it? Trying to get people to look at the murals because their fragments now go up to that cryptic space. But my theory is there's somebody else who died in the Assembly Chamber. His name was Cormac McWilliams.
Was he a fruit vendor?
He was not the fruit vendor.
Okay.
No, he was not the fruit vendor. He was a mason. And as we mentioned, the ceiling is collapsing, right? So they have to cover the vaulted ceiling, right? So they're working on it. And Cormac McWilliams, it's a Friday night. Everybody's tired. He's like, go home. I'll finish up, right? I'll see you Monday morning. I'll finish up. And they come back Monday morning, and Cormac had dropped from the ceiling onto his back. And I wish I could say he died, but it actually took him months to die from that fall. So he's left over the weekend.
So people just walked in and found him laying on his back?
So is it the trauma from the fall, right, that traps his spirit there? And the reason I think it could be Cormac is because he's my cousin.
Oh,
yes.
Twist.
He is my cousin, Cormac McWilliams. And so I like to think that perhaps it's my cousin Cormac.
So you have quite the deep Albany connection.
I do. I'm 7th generation Albany, so
Wow.
we've got a couple of spirits probably still hanging around.
So what was this then about a fruit vendor I read that also committed suicide?
Yeah, that story is gross.
That's the best kind.
It is super gross. So depending on your tour guide, so you have to keep in mind, people didn't have YouTube. They didn't have the internet. So reading the newspaper was pretty much how you saw everything.
Well, that sounds... I can't imagine that. Must have been really hard times.
So the fruit seller, he sort of like, you have to think about it today. We have outside the Capitol, we have our street vendors, right? We have the food truck. So he's like an early food truck.
Of course.
And unfortunately, for whatever reason, he wasn't making money anymore. The fruit stand was not sustainable. So he went into the Senate staircase. So when you go into the Capitol, it's... there's the $1 million staircase, the Senate and the Assembly staircase. So this is the brown sandstone staircase that is not the $1 million staircase. So he goes in there, and he jumped. And they have the newspaper clipping is horrific that women watched him drop.
Oh, no. And when you say drop, it was from the 4th floor.
Yeah.
From what I read. Somewhere back in 1890.
And back in 1890, he jumped. But the description in the newspaper describes his head cracking like a runny egg.
That seems slightly unnecessary.
It's heinous. It is so gross. Now, here's the eerie thing. My first year when I was doing the Capitol Ghost Tours, which at this point might be 5 years ago, when I would tell the story, I would point to a spot where I assumed he dropped, and I had a long string where people were not standing in that spot. So I'd have a group of, 30 people, and they'd all be crowded around me listening to a story, and yet there'd be a gap. there'd be a suspicious gap. If there wasn't a gap, there was one person standing there who later, when I told the story of Sam Abbott, the night watchman, was standing in the place where Sam Abbott was found.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that weird? So
That
I don't
is
know if they
weird.
were drawn to it or I don't know. It was a very weird year.
Wow. All right. So moving on, yeah, the Capitol building was definitely one of the first things to come up when I was looking into like Albany hauntings and things like that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Tenbrook Mansion.
Oh, and that's my home. I'm on the board there at Tenbrook, and they were one of the first people when I started giving ghost stories, ghost tours. They were one of the first people to embrace me, to be like, well, come to our house.
That's awesome. And for anyone who doesn't know, Tenbrook Mansion, built in 1797 for General Abraham Tenbrook and
Yep.
his wife, Elizabeth Van Rensselaer, right?
That is correct.
All right.
Yep. And
I know something.
And it was the second Tenbrook Mansion. The original one was in the Pastures neighborhood. So, think about sort of the South End area, called the Pastures because pastures. But there was a horrible fire that destroyed that home. And so they moved what was considered outside the city line at that point up on a hill that they lived in, and so they would have had this beautiful pastures and whatnot. It was really lovely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As I was looking up Tenbrook Mansion, I stumbled across an article back from 2011 talking about an investigation the Tri-City New York Paranormal Society did
Yeah,
there.
Gary and my buddies.
Oh, right. Okay, you're friends with him.
Oh, I'm absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Of course.
If you look at some of the dates for the pub crawl, we do have a couple of dates with Gary and Tri-City New York
really?
Paranormal where you can do your pub crawl and then you could do a ghost hunt with them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The best part about the article, though, was it included an EVP that they recorded.
Yeah, which one?
It was supposedly thought of as a child's spirit whispering, "I'm downstairs."
Which is interesting.
And I listened to it, and it was pretty creepy, I have to admit.
And now I'm going to reveal this on your podcast. New story. Breaking ghost story is we currently have people working in the house. It's an old house. We're constantly doing restoration. And we have these Irish brothers who are working on the house.
Okay, I like it already.
Yep. And they didn't know that the house is haunted.
Awesome.
And they came to the executive director, Sam, and said, "Is this place haunted?" And one thing they heard, they kept hearing voices, one of which was a child.
How long were they there before they came and asked?
They've been there a couple weeks, so they've probably
Okay.
been working there a week or two.
All right, so it didn't take that long.
No, it did not take that long. I was actually pretty surprised. Normally, it's like, from the stories that are here are people that are familiar with the house, but these guys came in and they had a ton of stories of lights turning on and voices
Really?
and getting grabbed.
Oh,
and
wow.
They really like these Irish boys. So
We are quite nice.
they are quite nice, right?
That was good. I also read they detected what sounded like a man saying, "Go away," in the kitchen area.
So, as I mentioned, I've been doing ghost tours for 10 years
Yes.
and more, right? Because we talked a little bit. My father is a local historian,
He is.
which meant that I had no interest in anything history, right? I didn't want anything to do with it.
That's how it works.
That's how it works. But he would be smart, and he would bring me to places like Tenbrook, and I'd be like, "Ugh, another old house." And he'd be like, "Oh, it's haunted." And I'd be like, "What do you mean it's haunted?" And he had a story, and I'm going to pull this back to the EVP, how we've gotten stories over the years that we're able to connect into bigger, greater stories. So he told me about a psychic who came to the house one time, long time ago, and it was a terrible psychic, like striking out, goes through each room and is like, "Somebody's died here." And it's like, no, just strike out, strike out, strike out. But they decide to go into the attic, and it must have been a slow day. And they're like, "Sure, bring them to the attic." And she sees a portrait of a man with a billy goat beard.
All right.
And she goes, "Oh, that's him. That's the man that I'm hearing." And
Really?
he's really upset because his portrait's not hanging in the Daughters of the American Revolution room, which is a room there. There's a mantle. You need to put his portrait back up. And they're like,
Oh, wow.
They're like, "Yeah, okay, go away," right? But then they're going through the archives, and sure enough, they see the picture of the man with the billy goat beard over the mantle. So they put it up. Now, when we tell this story on the tour, you'll look behind me, and it's a picture of George Washington right now. So it's one of those stories passed on that, oh, what happened? Well, then they do this EVP, right? This electronic voice phenomenon. And this voice, which has a guttural robotic sound, is saying, go away, go away.
Ah.
And then later, the same EVP, they play that same voice, comes back, and you hear a hunter ask something like, who are you, a ghost hunter? And the first time I heard it was with a group of people. They were doing their reveal. And the crowd thought the robotic's creepy guttural voice said, oh my God, with this T. And
Really?
everybody's thinking like, oh, it's a Dutch accent. Yeah, he's saying, oh my God, that's what's happening. But the author of the Capitol Ghost Tour was sitting next to me, Stuart Lehman. He goes, no. Not saying, oh my God, Alcott. So who are you? Alcott.
Oh, wow.
So this third family that lived in the home, and really it was their family home. They're the ones, we call it Pembroke Mansion, but it was really the Alcott home. That's who lived there. And the patriarch was Thomas Alcott. So that's pretty creepy, and I connect that story. We were doing inventory. I'm on the board there, and I found the portrait of the man with the billy goat beard.
Did you really?
Who is Thomas Alcott.
Oh, wow.
So why would he be mad? Because we're messing with his stuff. We moved the portrait. We're all over the place. So,
Wow.
yeah. So that's 3 different ghost stories that kind of pull together to tell one complete picture, really.
It is pretty amazing when you get different people's accounts.
Those are my favorite. There's also the stories of the woman in white, who's probably the more popular.
What was that one?
That's at Pembroke Mansion.
Okay.
And if your listeners are ghost aficionados, women in white are pretty common spirits.
Yeah.
Like everybody's got
Yep.
one. But what I love about the woman in white is the paranormal reveal with Tri-City Paranormal, that first one in 2011, they got a smoky image on the camera of like what looked like a woman in white looking out the window, which, if you're a skeptic, was it a smudge? But what was so interesting is the crowd got a little murmury, and it turned out the crowd were like made up of neighbors or people whose parents lived there, and a lot of people started raising their hand being like, I've seen her, or my parents did. And again, last week, my cousin, who is a Albany police officer, not really knowing I did ghost tours, he confirmed without me leading that, oh yeah, there's a woman in white that I
Really?
used to see. I used to see her.
Wow.
So those are my favorite when you get all those different people who
Oh, yeah.
sort of tell the same story.
All right. So moving on. In my search, I also came across Cherry Hill Mansion.
Yeah.
Built by the Van Rensselaer family as well, I saw.
Yeah, they're all over.
They really are.
Yeah, it's
They-
the patroons.
Huge part of Albany.
Absolutely, yeah. And so what they're famous for
Was murder.
was the murder at Cherry Hill. That is another tour that you can take, but it might even already be sold out. It's usually the last weekend or last 2 weekends in October.
The old murder tour, as you
It is
refer to it.
and that's what they call it, the murder tour. It is the murder at Cherry Hill. And I also will do that one. I volunteer just because it's so spooky and so scary. And that one starts in 1827. And there's a man named John Whipple.
Yes.
And he marries a girl named Elsie Van Rensselaer, right? So he marries into the Van Rensselaer family. She's very young, scandalously young. And there's also a groundskeeper, a keeper by the name of Jesse Strang.
Okay.
So Jesse Strang and
See, I know the names. I didn't know he was the groundskeeper, though.
yeah, he worked there. So,
Okay.
I'm sure a historian from Cherry Hill will be specific, but he worked on the grounds. And Elsie and Jesse fall madly and passionately in love. But
As the beginning of any good ghost story goes.
Exactly. But of course, we have the problem of Mr. Whipple. So,
There's always a third wheel.
so logically, what do you need to do?
Murder
him, right?
That's the first thing I think of by far.
Obviously, you got to take care of it. So it's the two of them conspire, and so the Murder at Cherry Hill tour takes place on that night, and they actually walk you through exactly what happened that night, where the people in the house were at that same time when that shot was fired. Because Jesse climbed up a tree, he fired his gun through a window, and he kills Whipple on the second floor. Then he jumps, and from what I understand, there was, word traveled really quick. There's been a murder, and he joined that mob, and he sobs louder than everyone, when they have...
Like anyone trying to cover up their crime?
Exactly, like total crocodile tears. I think he even, when he sees the body, he's dramatically, oh my God, he's... But we quickly figure out that, all right, Jesse, we know you did it. So he's arrested. And this is quite the thing because this is, as you said, the Van Rensselaers. I mean, even you just looking, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
They're rich. This is like a big...
Albany royalty.
Well, Albany royalty, and it's a sex scandal, right? So this
The best kind.
The best kind. And as we talked about, there's no YouTube or anything.
Nope.
So people cannot get enough of it. And Elsie, she was conspiring. She's pretty guilty. But she's rich. And she pulls the I was seduced.
Money solves a lot of problems.
Yeah. She said, I was seduced. He was a cad. He convinced me to do it. But there's evidence that, she was looking at poison. I think she bought the gun that he used.
What time frame was this? Do you know?
So 1827.
Okay.
Yep,
Maybe I missed-
1827. Now, so Jesse Strang is sentenced to hang. And I'm not making that joke, that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to, he's the last public execution in Albany.
Really?
Yep, because thousands upon thousands of people came to witness this. And his father was actually selling his confession in the crowd.
Wow.
And you think how gross, but Jesse actually abandoned a family to come to Albany. So there's also this is the only way they're going to get money to provide that family he abandoned.
Yeah.
So as for spirits, they in the Murder at Cherry Hill, they say that they haven't really felt anything necessarily. They say if there were spirits, would it be John Whipple who was murdered there? Would it be Elsie or even Jesse?
I know at least from the very little I read, it was claimed to be haunted by the ghost of Strang and Whipple.
Yes, that's what I've heard too. Elsie seems to have died with a clean conscience. She's just kind of moved right on.
Money helps everything.
Money helps everything. Now, where I've heard about the spirit of Jesse Strang is the Empire State Plaza, which is about where Gallows Hill would have been.
Okay.
And so they describe a man in a cloak and a top hat. And when I would do the ghost tours on the trolley, we'd have a man in a cloak and a top hat walking around. But I did a little teaser, in one of my promos, who's the man in the top hat. And again, my buddy Stuart Lehman at the Capitol calls me. He goes, "What are you talking about with that?" And he says, "Because I just got a call from a woman who's reading your promo. She thought it was mine, but it's not. And she claimed that it was daytime. She's at the plaza. There's all these people around. And she saw a man with a cloak and a top hat looking right at her.
Oh, wow.
And she looks to her left. She looks to her right. There's nobody else seems to be acknowledging that there's a cosplayer in the middle of the Empire State Plaza. And she went to go tell her girlfriend, but when she turned, he was gone. Ooh. And it always sort of unsettled her. And she thought maybe it was a trick of the eye. And then she read our promo and was like, what is going on? So that was the only recent story I heard about that one. But it's around Eagle Street that I think most people that I've read that they've spotted him.
Cherry Hill Mansion, yes. Mm-hmm. That was the big story I heard from them.
Yeah.
And I also stumbled across a couple other things, mainly Hattie the Hitchhiker.
Yeah.
I stumbled across Albany's Graceland Cemetery,
yeah.
I believe, right?
I'm pretty sure these are all my articles, if I think about it.
Fantastic. So I'm talking to the perfect person.
Yes, that's the one when you're the original Albany Ghost Tour. So Hattie is a tricky one because, so it's Hattie the Hitchhiker, as it says. So the thing about it is that's another, as we talk about Woman in White, the hitchhiker story is like everybody has it. We're going to tell this story and somebody else will say, that's in my town. Everybody says they have the origin of the hitchhiker story. I think it's Louis Jones, who's a local folklorist, claims that he thinks we have the origin of it. So I'm just going to put that out there, though.
Okay.
So people say, wait a minute, I know that story. Yeah, you probably do. It's an urban legend. But our version of it.
Hey, they wouldn't have made movies about urban legends if they weren't true.
That's right. Well, even this Hattie the Hitchhiker, for your millennial listeners, there's an episode.
Millennials.
There's an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Ooh, I remember that show. That was a great
there's,
show.
And there's a Hattie the Hitchhiker episode.
Was there really?
And that's when I learned about it, is that was one of the few Nickelodeon shows my dad would watch with me.
Oh, man, I need to go back and try to find that.
Yep. And he turned to me when we watched it, and he goes, this story started in Albany.
Ooh.
Yep. So,
I'm doing that tonight.
yes. I'm sure it's easy to find on YouTube or something. But they...
Thank you, YouTube.
and copyright.
How'd they get by back then?
I don't know. I don't know how we watched anything. So... the story takes place in Graceland Cemetery. So when you're going down Delaware Avenue, you're heading towards Del Mar, there's a cemetery.
Yep.
And the story goes, there was a man driving, and he sees a beautiful, sad girl in a beautiful dress, and she's shivering with her thumb out. And at this time, it's not such a dangerous thing, I guess, to pick up hitchhikers, so no problem.
Well, back in the day.
Back in the day.
I don't know what the time... I forgot again if there was a time frame on
that's
this or
the
something.
thing with the hitchhiker story. Depending what era you're telling it, it gets earlier.
Okay.
So for our audience, it is, we say, oh, sometime in the 50s or the 60s. But there's hitchhiker stories that take place with like a horse and carriage,
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty much any storyteller, you add like 25 to 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Like that's just how these urban legends go. But she's in a beautiful prom dress, and he pulls over, and she's shivering, and she's cold, and she's quiet, but he does get that her name is Hattie.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, where do you live? And it turns out she lives on the corner of Madison and Lark, where Savoy Tavern is today.
Okay.
So he drives her, and even though she's quiet, he thinks she's beautiful, and he's smitten. And he gives her his coat because he's a gentleman, keep her warm.
Of course.
And she goes into the house. So he's trying to think of an excuse. How can I meet this girl again? Aha, she took the coat in with her.
Mm-hmm.
So the next day, he puts on his Sunday shoes, his Sunday best, and he goes in and he knocks on the door, and an old lady answers. And he goes... he's trying to be charming, like, I'm here to pick up your daughter, right? He thinks he's being cute. But tears go into her eyes. She goes, I don't have a daughter. So he thinks he was played, like this was some kind of joke. So he starts to go away, and she goes, wait a minute.
As in, she ghosted him?
That is so stolen for every tour.
Strike one for
from
the
then
pun.
on. I love it.
All right.
So she pulls him, she says, well, why are you here? And so he talks about Graceland Cemetery, the girl in the prom dress, and dropping her off. And she gets really emotional and goes, well, my daughter Hattie was killed by a drunk driver on her way back from the prom. I think you just brought her home.
Oh, wow.
So he's completely creeped out by this, right? There's got to be a joke. So he gets back into his car. He goes back towards Del Mar, and he doesn't know why, but he takes that detour into Graceland. He doesn't know why. He gets out, and he's wandering the graves, and sure enough, he finds a stone, and sure enough, he sees his coat draped over Hattie's stone.
Wow.
Yes. So that's an urban legend, but you can trace it back. But as you say, like what year, depends on your storyteller. I bet when my niece tells it, it'll be back in the early 90s.
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to take away is I need to get credit for that joke when you tell it on your tour.
I will, and I will direct them back to the podcast, premiered here.
Absolutely.
Pun premiere.
Pun premiere. Let's talk about the Quackenbush House, where the
yeah.
Old English pub sits currently.
Yes, and I would say, unless Pearl Street Pub comes back with something else, that the Quackenbush House is the most haunted pub in Albany.
Ooh.
So it dates back officially to 1736.
Yep, and the great part about this is I actually know some of this since I went on the historic brew tour.
That's right. Yes, and as you can say, there's some people, parts of it could be even older, but we know at least the Quackenbushes were living there from the 1680s, which is pretty incredible. And it's gorgeous. I mean, they did a beautiful restoration of the home. But again, as we talk about how the Hops and Haunts tour sort of evolved, this haunted pub crawl, is I then realized I had enough to do a walking tour, so I would show up at the Old English pub, and at that time, another Irishman, Seamus was the manager.
Why is there always an Irishman named Seamus?
Right, he was...
I feel like it's such a stereotype, it seems like.
It's true, but unlike the stereotype, where most of my Irishmen in the ghost stories are very superstitious, this Seamus was not. He
Really?
did not believe in ghosts. When I would come in, he'd be like, "Go away, Maeve. We're not talking about this."
Okay.
But then I would start to come in, and I'm wearing him down. He'd say, "Well, I don't believe him, but my staff, they have stories." So the stories at first were a little lame. They were like, "Oh no, there's bread ghost, and he knocks the bread off of the shelf," and you're like,
Bread
"Cool,
ghost.
right?" The lights flicker on and off. You're like, "Okay, well, it's an old building. That makes sense." The one that was weird was they said, when you look in the mirror, sometimes it's not your face, but you kind of rub your eyes, and then it's your face again. So I was like, all right, that's something.
Getting my attention a little bit.
So I go back again, and there's Seamus. Now is a little less terse. He's like, well, I still don't believe, but I was closing up one night, and I'm, with a friend of mine, and she looked over at the staircase. And if you know Old English, the staircase going up to the second floor, there's like a wall that, the people do kind of disappear once they go up to the second floor. But they saw a shadow hand reach out, grab the banister, and slip away.
Really?
Now, the friend shrieked. Seamus looked, nobody there. So, all right, that's a little better. So then I see Seamus again, and this time he directed me to Frank, who I believe now owns Lock and Key.
Oh, wow.
And he says that, he was, I'm pretty, well, here's the thing. I will say, I don't remember if this was Frank's story or if Frank sometimes would crash my pub crawl and tell the story for me. So I'm going to qualify that I've heard the story from Frank.
All right.
But but one of their bartenders was working late at night. Again, always when you're closing. And
It's never in the middle of the day where it's convenient.
never in the middle of the day unless you're in the Empire State Plaza and there's cosplayers walking around. But
Yes.
And
you're drunk, and then you think the cosplayers are the ghosts.
Well, right. I hope not midday. That's terrible.
Well, I mean, if you got nothing better to do.
That's true. So he's trying to close up, and he goes down to the basement, and he sees a girl in a dress run and hide in the corner behind like a cooler or the boiler, which, it's so late. This guy is so tired, and he wants to go home, and he thinks it's like a drunk college girl in a dress. I don't know, but she's hiding. So he goes to shoo her away, and there's nobody there.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm getting somewhere, right? I got all these little pieces. So the second year we started doing the pub crawl, just for timing, I didn't stop at the Old English pub. It just wasn't working out. And some advertising went out. So I'm walking down Quackenbush Square, and Seamus sees me, and he runs out, and he points at me, and he goes, "Who's running this pub crawl? We are the most haunted pub in the city."
Oh, so he
Why
was
aren't you
all
stopping
about
it?"
it now.
And then he was all about it. So, but I was there actually after the neighborhood tour, and Seamus isn't the manager there anymore, but the staff there are they don't like to be there alone. They do feel like that there's something over their shoulder. They'll be down in the basement. They hear somebody call their name, and there's nobody there. So they do seem to feel, whether they believe in ghosts or not, and those are some of the more credible ones where they say, there's something here. I don't know what it is. I don't know that I believe, but I'm not alone here.
Something's off.
Something's off.
Ooh.
But not dangerous, and that's
No.
the one thing. And that's outside of Jesse Strang. Most of the stories that I'm thinking of, nobody ever feels like
Except for the
dangerous.
murder tour.
But the murder tour, Jesse Strang is pretty awful. Elsie Whipple.
Who would have
not great.
thought with a name like Murder Tour?
But the murder tour, yeah.
Yes. So I know those were the places I came across. Were there any other stories of yours that are favorites that we didn't touch on?
Let's see. I can wrap up with one more.
Okay.
Because I don't get to tell it too often because it's a little further uptown. So our pub crawl that
Yep.
we do leaves from Pembroke Mansion, and it does lower downtown. But I'm just going to, again, it's another urban legend, and I'm just going to tell it.
Let's do it.
Because when I tell this story, there are locals who can actually finish the sentence when I tell it. So
Okay.
it's just one of those things that your grandmother knows.
I'm intrigued.
So the state education building, right, which is across the street from the Capitol building.
Yep.
It's got 36 Corinthian columns. It's the longest freestanding colonnade in the United States. One of the tragedies about this building, it was built for the State Museum and the State Library because the archives were in the Capitol building. And this was one of the largest collection of books and manuscripts and documents in the country. I might even say the world. Like, it was incredible. And everything was boxed up in the Capitol, and it was going to go across the street to the State Ed building.
Mm-hmm.
But construction was delayed, so it didn't open until like 1912. The fire of 1911 occurred in the Capitol building,
Yeah.
torched those documents.
And Sam Abbott.
And Sam Abbott. So you lost your documents, you lost Sam Abbott, but they compare it to, maybe New York historians do, but like the fire of Alexandria. Like we lost countless priceless documents. So they're delayed in construction with this building. So the story goes is that there was an Italian stonemason and an Irish foreman. And the stonemason they're quickly pouring cement, they're trying to get this done, and the Italian stonemason fell face first into the cement as it was being poured. Mm-hmm. So obviously the friends want to stop the cement, we got to get him, and the Irish foreman lifted his hand and said, "Keep pouring." And they buried this mason alive.
He willingly was buried by cement?
I would assume the cement was sticky.
Okay.
I think it's more that his friends.
So
didn't
he thought
stop
they weren't going to get him out?
No, have you not seen Looney Tunes? Like, you fall into the cement.
Of course.
That's the rules. You fall in cement.
Looney
it's like
Tunes laid it
glue.
out perfectly years ago.
Yes.
If you fall in cement, it's over.
It's over. You're done, and you can't stop
You
the pouring.
just accept it
It would ruin it.
and let everyone else live their lives.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
I feel like such a fool.
Right. So that's how we learn these things.
It is.
So but now here's the story then, right? So we have this sort of ethnic story that people have passed on. Now the basement of the State Ed building is called the dungeon. Like, that's what people who work there, it's called the dungeon.
Fantastic.
But everybody I've met who works there are like, it's totally haunted. They call the entity that's in there Jason, which is not a very Italian name. But,
No, not at all.
But that is what they call him. His name is Jason. But they usually probably send interns down there. People talk about it being unusually cold. You get kind of a sad feeling when you're down in the dungeon.
I mean, basements aren't always the most happy place to be in
Nope.
general.
And they say, though, that luckily, even though you get kind of sad and creeped out, the spirit is friendly. So they'll talk about, like, you're looking for a book or you're trying to finish something up and the book you need, like, pops off the shelf. So, or the page, like, you're flipping through, you rub your eyes, and then you look down and, oh, there it is. There's the page I'm looking for.
If I was a ghost, I would screw with people in such happy and ridiculous ways.
Of course. Absolutely. Well, and so far, like I said, I don't know.
If you're looking for something, I'd throw it at them.
Oh, see, that's that's what we call a poltergeist.
Okay.
So
I would be more of a poltergeist.
You would be a poltergeist.
I would be. It would be fun to torment people in that scenario.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's sort of I'm the worst people to give ghost tours because I'm in that mansion, and every bump, every creak, I'm like running out the door. But
I mean, well, if I'm alive, yes, I'd be running out the door at that too.
but I had some fun with Paul Nooney, my co-guide. Knocking on things or sneaking up on them. I mean, you can't help that. That's what's so fun about these, right?
It is. Let me ask you this: do you think animals can sense paranormal activity?
So I have heard that. There are stories of, people blame. I mean, I have a cat and they're just weird. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, now, did you just notice the elevator?
I heard something.
Yeah.
And there's no one else in the room.
And there's no one else in the room. Nobody would have pushed that button.
I don't see it lighting up, though.
All right. Hopefully it leaves us alone.
All right.
Anyway, yes, I think anything. I see my cat go chasing after things. One time, though, I thought they were acting weird, and they were hyper-focused on my kitchen, and I kept making fun of them, like, what are you seeing, ghosts? A raccoon broke into my house.
Ooh.
So maybe there's that.
That doesn't sound okay.
So maybe don't go for the ghost first.
Well, I ask because sometimes we catch our dog Zoe. She'll be doing something, and then she'll just stop and randomly stare in a direction. So I'm not quite sure if she's mentally challenged or if we should be moving.
No, I mean, so long as it's not menacing the dog.
No, she stops and stares for a little while, and I'm leaning towards maybe she ate some paint chips or something when she was a pup before we adopted her.
No, she's going to eat a ghost pet.
Okay. So we need to move then. That's what I hear. To wrap up, I actually had a listener question.
Okay.
Yes, but it's not about Albany. It's more about Schenectady, so I don't know what your knowledge is on Schenectady. We talked a little bit prior to the podcast.
Sure.
But from Anthony Rossi, host of Video Game Crosstalk, obviously in Schenectady, the Stockade is the rather historic and haunted part of the town. So he says, so this is more Schenectady, but anything related to the Stockade getting repeatedly burned down during the early days of our nation.
Yeah.
I know it was burned down a number of times, like 60 to 70 people murdered at another time.
There's something going on in Schenectady.
There really is.
And they've got some really beautiful ghost stories, and I wish I were...
I heard the elevator again. It got louder that time.
It got louder that time. So,
I feel a little cooler now.
I don't think DeWitt Clinton wants us talking about Schenectady.
No.
He's like, no.
No, Albany or nothing.
Albany or nothing. So I wish I had more specific stories. Proctor's has they have a really wonderful ghost stories that they... theaters tend to be sort of hotbeds for the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
Actors don't want to take a final bow. What I would recommend, a friend of mine, Matt Millett, who's also a DeWitt Clinton fanboy. Anything you heard me talk about DeWitt Clinton, I got from a text message from him. He loves all things DeWitt Clinton, but he also runs Albany Archives. Mm-hmm. And if you check out Albany Archives on Spectrum News, he does have a Proctor's ghost story evening that he did. So I would check that out because I'm not going to do it justice. But one thing we talked about was Schenectady. So I also have a strange fascination with Irish vampires specifically.
Yes.
We talked about that. If you really want me to go off on it, hear me talk about it, I will be at the Irish Museum. I don't know when this podcast will go up, but Tuesday
hopefully in about 2 days or so.
Oh, okay. So Tuesday, the October 9th, I will be at the Irish Museum talking about Irish vampires and Bram Stoker. But there is a historian that I look at who also loves Irish vampires, but he did an offshoot on American vampires. He brings up a Schenectady vampire.
Ooh.
I was so excited to see it in the index. It was mold. It was vampiric mold in a basement.
And we did discuss this a little bit before we started talking.
Right. And as we talked about, Schenectady floods a lot, so I don't know what it was about this particular mold in a basement. They kept scrubbing it away. It kept coming back. You'd get tired. It would suck your energy. So Schenectady has beautiful, wonderful ghost stories. There's Louis Jones, Albany Archives. They will tell you. I'm going to leave you with Schenectady vampiric mold.
Yes. So vampiric mold. I really hope that's true.
Yeah, I'll have to send you the article. It's pretty, okay.
All right, so I think that's going to wrap up this episode of Stories from a Bar. I'd like to thank my guest, Maeve McEneny. McEneny. Damn it. Johnson. I got the Johnson part right.
But you got the Johnson.
Okay. Thank you again for being on the show. It's been, I appreciate you hanging out, having some drinks, sharing some ghost stories.
Yeah, anytime.
Yes.
If you want to follow me on the original Albany Ghost Tour, that's where you can find my haunted happenings, and then albany.org for all of our other cool regional events that we're doing.
And as I mentioned somewhere earlier in the podcast, be sure to follow their Twitter. That's how I found Discover Albany.
Mm-hmm. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Yes, that's it. You'll find a bunch of cool events you don't even know that are going on.
Yeah.
Thanks again to the awesome people here at Pearl Street Pub for letting us hang out and record. Be sure to check them out. Check out their website and Facebook to keep tabs on all the cool stuff they have going on. Thank you, everyone out there, for checking out the show. You can find Stories from a Bar on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the social medias, as I like to say, at StoriesFAB. You can also email the show at storiesfab@yahoo.com. Always looking for interesting guests and people to talk to, awesome stories. Let's have some drinks. Let me know what you think of the show, anything like that. And finally, you can find the show on iTunes, Podbeam, Stitcher, Google Play, and even YouTube now. People in the old days didn't have YouTube, so you should appreciate it even more.
Yeah, we covered that a lot on this podcast.
We did. We actually talked. That was not intentional. So be sure to subscribe, and even more importantly, leave a fantastic review, because the show is that good. So until next time, cheers.